So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Global Food and Environment Institute seminar. I'm Louise Dye. I'm just going to remind you of some of the etiquette for our Zoom meeting. So yeah, as I said, I'm the chair for today. I'm Louise Dye. I'm Professor of Nutrition and Behaviour, and I have a joint post between the School of Food Science and the School of Psychology. And I'm really delighted today to be able to introduce a great speaker for you. Charlotte Evans is our speaker today. She's Associate Professor in Nutritional Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Leeds, with more than 20 years experience researching dietary behaviour and food environments. She's very much focused on the quality of children and adolescent diets and those with the poorest diets. And a recent NIHR award looking at school meal uptake is a real testimony to this. Excellent work. She's had over 100 publications on and a very recent book on transforming food environments, which I'm sure she'll tell us something about. And she's also the recipient of the prestigious Elsie Widdowson Medal for contributions to public health nutrition from the UK Nutrition Society. So over to you, Charlotte. Welcome, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you to Jenny and all the team at GFEI for inviting me. Really happy to be here to talk about food environments. Nothing new about food environments. This is a picture of me at Pompeii earlier this year, next to a thermopolium, excuse my Latin, 2,000-year-old fast food restaurant. Lots of people in Pompeii didn't have kitchens and they would go down and get their lunch every day. Some goat or some shellfish or lentils, for example. And we quite often think, when we think of food environments, we quite often think of the out-of-home food environment, but I definitely want to widen it out. And today, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the rationale and why we should act to improve children's diets, but a little bit on that, looking at my definition, my perhaps wider definition of food environments, and looking at different approaches, how we can improve dietary behaviour, and some examples here. 4 examples: retail, schools, out of home, and marketing, and just touching on evaluation. So a lot of this is in my book that came out earlier this year. So if you're interested, you can always find out more. So we know that if we look at diet-related disease, childhood obesity is very high in the UK. We're one of the worst places in Europe, near the top of the league table that you don't want to be at the top of. And COVID has certainly exacerbated this. The national weighing programs have shown that it's getting worse, and there are huge inequalities. So if we look at obesity prevalence by levels of deprivation, these are deciles of deprivation, we can see that gap is widening. And COVID, again, has widened the gaps, although obesity hasn't really increased. In fact, it was decreasing before COVID in wealthiest families. It is very much on the increase, despite all the efforts that we have made so far in terms of obesity, childhood obesity prevention. And this obesity, high obesity prevalence also increases risk of type 2 diabetes and hypertension, which is much harder to diagnose and treat in children and young people. There's also £50 million a year spent in the UK just extracting teeth. So it's not going to surprise anyone listening probably that we don't adhere, most of us don't adhere to healthy diets. This is in adults. There's only 0.1% of the population that's actually adhering to all 9 of the Eat Well Guide recommendations here listed on the right. And this is also true for children. Children's diets are low in fruit and vegetables, and adolescents, probably the UK is the worst in Europe in terms of diet quality. In the research that's being done on adolescents. So we do have to act more. We have to intervene at every sphere of influence. If we look at ecological models, it starts with individuals, but then there's also spheres of influence that include social networks and then our physical environments, work, home, school, and macro level environments, so looking more at national policies. And there has been, over the last 10 years, there's been much more of a move into improving food environments, but 10 years ago, this is a copy of a House of Lords discussion on behaviour change. It was very much focused on individuals, less controversial perhaps in asking individuals to change their diet rather than changing shared environments. But we are definitely making progress. Now, I wanted to have a picture that really showed how much time do we spend in all these different physical environments. Instead, the only thing I managed to find was kind of tracking of what we do, what we spend our time doing rather than where. But you can see the little icons. We spend a lot of time at home, and the food that we eat at home usually comes from supermarkets, and a lot of time at work. That's the yellow section, or if you're a child, schools. So, but we mustn't forget those in between places, the community spaces, the transport hubs, the bus stops, the vending machines in the train stations. These are all important as well in terms of food environments. And we also spend a lot of time on watching television or on digital media, so social media, and so we're being exposed to adverts and also news and media's nutrition related. So that's also an important area. And of course, socializing, going out of home, restaurants and cafes, and also exercising. So when we think about community spaces, we should also think about leisure centres and other places, even watching sport as well as taking part in sport. So we need to think about all of these different environments, and they're not just physical, they're digital as well. And there are many different ways to look at how we're going to tackle dietary behaviour in different environments. But one of my favourite frameworks is the Ladder of Interventions by the Nuffield Council of Bioethics. And it ranks different approaches that you can take in terms of strength, and you need more evidence and more agreement that action should be taken the further you go up the ladder. So at the beginning of the ladder, at the bottom of the ladder, there's do nothing or monitoring, and then at the top there's completely eliminating choice. So this is unacceptable for people. It can be, but possibly more acceptable for children when you think about eliminating choice in school food. And in between there, we've got changes in availability, in cost, whether it's subsidy or taxes, and also guiding choice through changing the default, so looking at nudging, which is an important area and growing as well. So if we're thinking about those 4 examples, so starting off with supermarkets, often thinking about the 4 Ps, product, price, placement and promotion. A lot of work has been done in this space in terms of product availability, reformulation, a lot of it voluntary, and that can vary by country. Just I'm focusing on the UK. You think about the responsibility deal. And the sugary drinks industry levy, before the levy actually went on, there was 2 years of reformulation, which reduced the proportion of drinks higher than with more than 5 grams per 100 mils in them. So a lot done in terms of availability, certainly in high fat, sugar, salt foods, but perhaps not so much done in terms of increasing availability of fruit and veg and nutrient dense food. Also, taxes and subsidies are a good way of changing behaviour. And if we think about placement, we're thinking about placement actually within a supermarket, but also access, spatial access to a supermarket. Should we take supermarkets to people with fruit and veg vans rather than ice cream vans going up the road? And promotion, that could be with or without a price difference. It could be just kind of signage, or it can come with discounts or 2-for-1s or whatever. So quite a lot done in this space. And if we look at the evidence, so with this synthesis of evidence, the yellow one on the left is where there is most evidence, and then there is less evidence as we go towards the right. But we have very good evidence that there's not much benefit of signage telling people to eat healthier foods, nutrient dense foods. Whereas price and availability, there's good evidence that those do work, especially when you have the two in tandem. You've got the increasing price and availability of nutrient-dense foods at the same time as reducing availability and increasing price of energy-dense foods. Positioning, there's not so much evidence, or of course we're looking at published evidence. There may be other evidence that's not published. But there is consistent evidence of, if there's increasing prominence, whether that's on ends of aisles or at checkouts, that can be helpful. Less with promotions, less evidence with promotions, and then with looking at spatial access, a very mixed picture. And certainly in the US, there does seem to be that association with if you're closer to a supermarket, you have better a healthier diet, but we're not seeing that in most parts of the UK. So if we now go to school food, of course, I've done a lot in school food. I could probably talk for the whole 20 minutes on school food, but I'll try not to. There are lots of different, if you look along the top, lots of different school meal systems. In England, it's about half packed lunches and school meals. The next one is, I don't know if you want to hazard a guess, Sweden, where there's free school meals for everyone from 5 to 16. And then we have Australia, it's mostly packed lunches, although there are many states that are now going over to a more school meal system. And then the last one is Japan, where rather than individuals deciding on whether they're going to have a school meal or packed lunch, it's a whole school. So a whole school will either, all of them will have a school meal or all of them will have the bento boxes. So many different systems. Most of the research is consistently saying that having a school meal is better quality diet. There is not as much evidence on obesity outcomes, but for secondary school, it all seems to fall apart, whether that's due to adherence. School food is just one part of the school day. There's also good evidence from systematic reviews that school breakfasts are a good idea, school gardens, and any programs that offer repeated exposure of vegetables. But really, to make a difference to what children, a substantial difference to what children are eating at school, the best thing is to really severely restrict the foods, the energy-dense foods and drinks, and to just serve healthy foods, because even if there's mostly healthy foods and a little bit of unhealthy, they'll go for the less healthy. And on the left-hand side in the UK or in England, there's been a huge amount. It's been a roller coaster road of different policies in terms that relate to school food. At the moment, we have the school food plan, which is food-based, but again, much more, as I said before, much more successful in primary schools than secondary schools. So probably more monitoring needed for better adherence, and certainly whole school approaches are needed with really good school leadership, and looking at the school in the dining room environment, and also packed lunch policies, and it goes hand in hand with other things that are happening outside the school, like looking at portion and package sizing of foods that are commonly in packed lunches. We have free school meals for the very youngest, and there is there are many agencies that feel that we should extend that to the whole of primary school. So if we move now to the third one, out of home food environments, we know that the food that we eat out of home does tend to be less healthy. It's lower in vegetables. And there's a higher density of fast food outlets, just so you can't see the writing on the bottom left graph, but that's just showing that the number of the density of fast food outlets increases with levels of deprivation. So in deprived areas, there are far more, there's higher access to fast food. I was talking about community food environments, and that includes sports centres, cafes, transport hubs. The vast majority of food sold there is high in fat, sugar and salt, and very, very little vegetables in particular. So what works in out-of-home environments? So much less done in this space than schools. But there's certainly some good examples of menu labeling work. We've now got calories on menus, but nudging by highlighting healthier options on menus, although that might work with certain groups of people better than others. There's a couple of examples of nudging here. You're offering a smaller portion size of rice in this instance, so rather than supersizing, downsizing, and that's a nudge. And then in Japan, there was an offer of a nominal discount, so a bit like just spending a few pence on a bag. We don't want to do it. Most of us could afford that 5 pence, but we don't. So offering a 10p discount, it's not really for the money, but it's a nudge to say, order something with more vegetables in it. And they saw a large increase in people that ordered vegetable-rich meals, but importantly, it increased more in the lower income group, so it wasn't widening inequalities. And then, of course, availability. So looking at vending machines and having more packets that are smaller, or some nutrient-dense foods such as fruit and nuts, and can we put in vegetables? I saw some amazing vending machines in Norway. They had whole meals in with lots of vegetables, and it is possible if people are asking for it. So the last one is food marketing. There's a huge number of marketing techniques that are focused on children: branding, characters, product placement, sponsorship. These affect cognitive outcomes such as product awareness and trust and beliefs and preferences, but also behavioral outcomes. So children will be more likely to have the energy dense foods if they're marketed more. Not so much evidence on looking at health outcomes, but perhaps we wouldn't expect that because obesity is such a complex area. And of course, it's widespread. 3/4 of children exposed to food marketing each day. And the WHO review has shown that mandatory policies do improve dietary behaviour rather than voluntary. And at the end of the day, it is a human rights issue. Children and young people, so including adolescents here, are not fully cognitively developed till their 20s. They're emotionally vulnerable, and this is being exploited. So, it's very sad that restrictions on marketing to children got kicked down the road, but hopefully it will come in. So it's not just about marketing, but information. We're doing some work here looking at the quality of nutrition information. We published something on newspapers to show that the many articles about published studies are low quality, but we're also now looking at Twitter, are people more likely to share nutrition news that is low quality. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on evaluation. So we've looked at quite a few different food environments here. So we really have to think about how we're going to evaluate them. And certainly we might not be able to rely on randomized controlled trials as much as we used to. Maybe we need to be a little bit more innovative. There's some really good work that's looked at reducing the effect of the sugary drinks industry levy using interrupted time series analysis. So you can see over time that the proportion of sugary drinks has gone down. So this is when it was actually, so you can see the line here, this is when it was announced, and then you've got reformulation. First of all, it was quite slow, and then it speeded up until when it was actually introduced, there were a much smaller proportion of drinks that were actually had to pay the levy, and then most of the drinks actually avoided it. So this was at the same time had an impact on the price of the sugary drinks, but also reduced availability. So it's much harder to find the sugary drinks. And they compared that with fruit juices that were not part of the levy. So this is one approach, and another way of looking at it is in terms of a whole, looking at lots of different food environments at the same time. You're going to need an index. How do you actually look at, so if you're going to look at a child over the whole day, just how they were exposed to different marketing, you need to look at different environments, but you also might want to include information on what is sold in the shops that they go into or the shops that they go past. We need some kind of score. So rather than looking specifically at one particular environment, we need to include a whole range of different environments. So are we going to have like a healthy environment index? And so WHO have been doing some work on this, and that may be the way that we go in terms of looking at progress. And if we're going to look at specific food environments, we're probably going to need to take more of a systems approach, which of course then means that it's much more difficult to evaluate as well. So this was a systems map that was done looking at sugary drinks industry levy. And if you think about what might affect our preferences for sugary drinks, then there's lots of different things, whether it's acceptability, availability, the price, what's happening in terms of regulation and policies, and whether it's more individual factors as well, or preferences, I think I mentioned. So this is something that's certainly happening more in the future, and we're now looking at school food systems mapping. And if we think about school food environment, and I mentioned whole school approaches, and leadership, head teacher leadership is coming out as a kind of major gatekeeper. But also the problem with once you start looking at systems, then you get these unintended consequences. So, you know, maybe that schools are doing a lot, but then as soon as the child walks out of the school gates and then is being exposed to the food marketing at the bus stop or going into the local convenience store, and the first thing that they see when they walk in is a packet of crisps. So, you know, evaluating the whole system makes sure that you reduce those possibilities of unintended consequences. So I've gone through that quite quickly, and I now want to kind of just offer a synthesis of, well, the whole book really. So first of all, just taking a moment to kind of look at this inverted pyramid. What I've done here is we've seen most of these little icons that stand for the different food environments. So there's a couple of new ones that I didn't mention before, places of worship. And looking at these to see where the evidence is that a certain approach has worked. So if we look at the top is the stronger types of approaches. So I haven't put complete elimination. That's very difficult. We know that when in New York, they tried to ban 32-ounce big gulps, and they were taken to court and said it was against people's human rights to be able to order a big gulp of Coca-Cola. Other drinks are available. So I started with availability, and we can certainly see that there's really good scientific evidence that's been published on increasing availability of nutrient-dense foods and reducing availability of energy-dense foods. That works in a whole range of different environments. Now, those that have got an orange ring around them, those are the ones where I feel that there's good evidence that they reduce inequality. So sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes there's evaluation that hasn't really looked at whether it has a differential effect on different people in different socioeconomic positions, but certainly where that is available, I've added it. And you can see that for availability and price has also been effective. Perhaps there's more done in supermarkets, anywhere else. But you can see that for those stronger approaches, there's good evidence that they also reduce inequalities. Now, as we go further down, nudging, there's quite a lot of nudging, but perhaps some areas where there hasn't been as much done that could be is out of home environment. But certainly nudging is promising, but there needs to be more work done on looking at how or whether it does reduce inequalities, or at least not widening. So we just don't know that yet. And when we go further down to labeling and information, you know, we do need more than just giving people information. Even if it's a good quality label, it's still likely that those who are more educated and have more time or wealthier are able to interpret that label more easily and come to access. So, you know, in terms of vegetables, we need lower price vegetables, more widely available in lots of different environments, and more marketing of vegetables. So in conclusion, it's complex, includes the food environment, includes a whole system of different places and different people, and we all share, many of these food environments we're sharing as the public. Who has a say? We all have a say in what our environments look like, and if we're not happy with it, if we go into a shop that sells clothes and we're offered a chocolate bar, we don't necessarily say anything or speak up, say, I don't want this. But we should all have a say in that and have a good idea about what we want our food environments to look like. And progress has been made, and I think that there are changing attitudes from policymakers, and it is on the agenda. But we need to be strong. We need good leadership. We do need those stronger measures in terms of availability, looking at availability and price, to really make a difference in people's eating behaviours, especially those who need it the most. But nudging is also promising, but we need to carefully evaluate it to make sure it doesn't widen inequalities. And we're increasingly looking at systems approaches, and you can see that with quite a lot of funding calls now have the word systems in them. So we're spending more time thinking about that as we're more likely to make progress. And it comes down to it. No country in the world has reduced the prevalence of obesity, so we're still trying. No one's been successful yet. And there's lots in policy, but there's also lots of advocacy in this space. So School Food Matters are really pushing for free school food for all primary school children, and Food Foundation are really having a massive drive on increasing vegetables and getting retail and out-of-home sector to pledge to providing more vegetables, so it's more available. So that's all I have to say today. Oh my goodness, I've got 2 minutes to spare. That's quite good. I was worried I wouldn't get everything in, but please do ask some questions. This was me looking really happy opening my book when I got it for the first time, although I found out that they'd actually sent it to a few friends that had pre-ordered it. They got their copy before me, but I was really happy that day. And please let me know if you want any information on any of the, because I've gone quite quickly, but if you've got any questions or if you want any of the sources, the information, the references and anything I've said today, please let me know. And then if you do want to get a hold of the book, I think this 20% discount code is still available. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was an excellent whirlwind tour of a whole load of food environments, and I hope people found it really interesting. I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet, so if people want to put questions in the chat. Oh no, I can see one now. So the first question in the chat is from Gaza, and she said, progress has been made in the past 10 years, and yet obesity and food-related illness is increasing. Is progress not catching up quickly enough? If so, what needs or could be done? It's a bit of a $1 million question, I think.
Yes, and there will be a lag time. I think even if we do everything that we set out to do, then there still would be this lag time. We wouldn't certainly in adults, we wouldn't see those benefits. But I think the fact that we really do need to be having a focus on children, you would expect to see benefits quite quickly. And we know that with COVID, we've seen the opposite. We've seen if children stay at home, they're not walking to school, they're not moving about, they're not taking exercise, we can see that things can get worse very quickly. So actually, if we do everything that we've promised with restricting food marketing, with improving out of home, with making sure that everything that is in place at the moment is monitored and adhered to, I think we would see progress in 3 years in children. But we have to have, we just all have to put it as a priority. And unfortunately, the government is thinking of an awful lot of different things at the moment. And they've, delayed that food marketing, which is really bad news.
Slightly distracted by other things. I can see that Gazer's actually got a hand up. Gazer, do you want to come in and ask a question?
Yeah, I just have a question to Charlie in that context of my first question. If you would be queen for one day, which measurement, however controversial it would be, is the one that you would focus on? If you had, if you could put anything forward, however controversial, what is the bit that you would pick on first?
I would completely ban. I would have a focus on vegetables and whole grain. I would, oh dear, there's going to be people from industry listening. So I would have a complete ban on food marketing to anyone under 18. Definitely. I really like what TfL have done, and I would have that over the whole country. So there's no food marketing. I would market vegetables, and I would do lots in schools in terms of positive food marketing. Having been to Japan, they do an amazing job in really promoting local food and, healthy and sustainable food. So I would have whole school approaches, and I would put it on Ofsted. I would have vegetables available, subsidized everywhere. I mean, I often think about being God of the food universe, and there are lots of things I do. Would it be enough? Many of the roots of childhood obesity are in poverty. The whole economic system needs revisit. It needs completely changing. So even if we did everything in the food sphere, we'd still end up with a problem, because there's just too much childhood poverty in this country.
I think queen for one day isn't enough for you, Charlotte. I think God for a while longer. Right, so I'm going to move us on a little bit, because I've got a few more questions. One of them is, how has the suppression of sugary drink sales affected sales of products with non-caloric sweeteners? There are some data that non-caloric sweeteners are not helpful for diet at all.
Yes, so there's more. Oh gosh, I'd have to go and look at the Public Health England figures, but in terms of the volume of drinks that people are eating and people are drinking, adolescents were the main targets for this policy. I don't think there's any change at all. So it is completely through reformulation that sugar has reduced in children and adolescents, mainly adolescents, due to having more drinks that are lower in sugar. So yes, it's not optimal that now that they're having possibly a low calorie drink, but it's probably better that they're not having the sugar.
Ultimately, they're not all going to switch to water, are they?
No, I mean, we don't want people to have bottled water. We want to get it out of the tap.
Exactly. Okay.
Don't want more plastic.
No. And another question then, you mentioned calories on menus. Do you think this is working as an education tool for the general public?
We're being recorded, but I have to say I'm not a massive fan of calories on menus. I would love to have a little picture of a vegetable or whole grain or fiber, or I would want more of a positive. I think this is the obsession with calories. It does work, but I worry that it's going to widen inequalities. If you're choosing, if you're a young person or you haven't got much money, I would have thought you'd go for the one with the highest calories. It's the lowest price. So I'm worried that it will actually widen inequalities. It's also not nice for people that have any kind of eating disorders.
Absolutely.
Those eating disorders can linger, so it's not just in adolescents.
I know a lot of clinical colleagues are not happy about that from the perspective of eating disorders.
For middle-aged women sitting down in restaurants, calories can be quite good. Probably for middle-aged men, though they won't admit it.
Okay.
I'm not sure it works for younger people.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
I don't know. It's being evaluated, so we'll see.
Okay. So another question now is about your view on nutrition education and awareness in children. Would this have a positive impact or lead to possible fears around foods?
We definitely need nutrition education. I mean, it's part of the curriculum. It could be expanded, and I think it should include gardening and cooking and just that, sensory tasting, all that, part of the curriculum, just trying lots of different vegetables. We're doing an evaluation of a program flavour school at the moment, and it's, you know, it's amazing just seeing the videos of children just trying different foods. It's like they're doing a maths test, you know, they've just got a line of vegetables that they're trying, and, you know, either spit it out or swallow it, and then, you know, say whether they liked it or not. And, you know, all of that's part of that's education. And, you know, and it's definitely important with children. We're seeing that young people are much more aware of the Eat Well guide, whereas older adults aren't, because it wasn't covered in the, you know, in the curriculum when they were at school. So there's lots we can do at school. There's, you know, there's lots done fruit and veg, but it's not enough on its own. You know, we need so much more. They don't hold the purse strings. So, and, you know, we have the free fruit and veg scheme, but, you know, there needs to be more promotion of vegetables in primary school. But then, you know, a lot of things fall apart in secondary school. So, you know, it should definitely be part of, you know, this is what you need to know to be a good citizen. You know, you need to be able to shop and cook. And so I'm totally supportive of education, but education on its own, we definitely can't rely on. Yeah.
And a lot of what you've talked about today, Charlotte, has been around the school environment. And obviously that's something you know a great deal about. But you made a couple of comments, and I wanted to pick up on them, about what happens when the kids leave school. So, and even before they get to school. So we know that in Leeds, for example, 20% of children starting school are obese in the less affluent areas, and it's around 6% in the more affluent areas. So that suggests that school is already trying to address a problem that started much earlier. And I wondered what your thoughts were about what we can do in that home environment and with parents, for example.
Yeah, and there's some really good programs. You know, there's Henry and Sure Start, and all of these are absolutely needed, and they need to be run. They need to be really accessible to everyone, but particularly those living in deprived areas. So yes, I mean, I haven't done much work in this space, but I work with people that do. And yes, there's so much that needs to be done. Like you said, the problems are already there when they start school. They continue to get worse. And so I feel that at every single stage, we need to intervene. But absolutely, you know, we're really letting those families down by not doing anything in the preschool years. And I don't think, I mean, there are no food standards, you know, nursery food standards, you know, in the UK. You know, we've got school food standards, and then, you know, there's nothing before school. So I mean, that's just a crazy situation. We need to do something about that.
And tapping into, you know, parents don't feed their kids foods they don't like themselves, they don't do that sort of thing. Someone's made a lovely comment here that said that they remember doing food at school, but all we made was cake, sausage rolls and loads of different bread. So yeah, I had the same experience. And I think, yeah, if we're going to teach them about nutrition education, it needs to be about good nutrition, doesn't it? So there's a debate going on about the sugar in the chat, but I'll come back to, let's have a final question, which I think is really pertinent, and that's about food prices and the cost of living crisis. So Melian has said, I'm concerned that people are not able to afford a healthy diet, even if you have an enabling environment to support it. Public Health England reports that the poorest segments are most obese. What concrete measures can we do regarding this?
Yeah, more money. I mean, people need more money. There's no way of getting around that. But I think the Food Foundation, who are very much aware of this, you know, they are really campaigning for more vegetables. They are more sustainable, they're healthy, and they do tend to be cheaper, and they just need to be more accessible, more available, and subsidized wherever they can. So I feel that there are so many difficulties at the moment, but you know, unless we actually reduce the proportion of households that are in poverty, that it's very difficult.
And if we can make those vegetables available, we maybe need to show people what to do with them, so that we can give them more.
And certainly, you know, cooking is making vegetables more accessible. But if people can't, you know, this is cooking if people can't afford to turn the cooker on, then you know, that's difficult. That's really difficult. But the answer is not more food banks. We should be in a situation where we don't need any food banks.
And this is where it becomes political in a way, doesn't it, with a small p. We're looking at, you're doing great research around nutrition and improving the diet of people and trying to address obesity, but it's very hard to do that without that political agenda working with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, none of us are going to be out of a job anytime soon. So.
We hope. We hope. So, Charlotte, that was a fantastic talk, a really great discussion. I hope everybody will give you a virtual round of applause. But thank you so much for adding to our library of brilliant GFEI talks. And yeah, look forward to hearing more about free school meals when your project gets rolling.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you everyone for listening.